Taika Waititi is a New Zealand actor, filmmaker, and generally very funny person in interviews. Hi there, I'm GM Jim Heskett, and I've been fortunate enough to visit New Zealand a couple of times. If you haven't, add it to your bucket list, but this isn't a tourism video, we're talking about Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop games. And today we're going to add to my series about TTRPG advice you can glean from authors and creators to spice up your D&D game. So what tips does this Academy Award-winning storyteller have for us? Let's look at 7 pieces of writing advice from Taika, and we'll dig into how we can improve our tabletop games with those nuggets. And as a disclaimer to cover my own butt, if you're watching this in the future and Taika Waititi has been cancelled over something, don't be mad at me, I didn't know. First on our list is start with the beginning and the end, then figure out the scenes in between. Outline your whole campaign, and only then start the actual writing. And this is when we're going to have to interpret a little, because you absolutely should not decide the ending of your campaign before you start. More on that in a second. Let's talk about beginnings first. Every campaign world needs a good hook and a strong start. Here's a campaign hook you're free to steal. In this fantasy world, magic has consequences. Whenever someone casts a spell, a mysterious glowing sphere appears in the sky above them and just hovers there. These spheres are indestructible, immovable, and starting to accumulate in large numbers over the years. The blanket of magic spheres is causing weather problems all across the land. This is a decent beginning and gives your players room to dig into and explore. A campaign without an intriguing beginning is likely to go nowhere. Now about endings. For obvious reasons, it's a fool's errand to plan the end of your campaign up front. Doing so will probably lead to railroading, but there is something similar you can do that's very useful. Instead of you, the GM, planning an ending, think about how your BBEG sees this story playing out. That's the ending you picture, because your BBEG is going to be gradually working toward that ending, and only intervention from the PCs can stop it. So you give your villain a goal, steps to achieve that goal, and then set them on their path. Will the villain's plan work? The villain certainly wants it to, and will do everything in their power to win, including pivoting when the PCs inevitably foil some part of that plan. Real quick, since I have you, could I get a like and subscribe below? It only takes a second and it helps us both out. Make sure you click all next to notifications, and click the join button to get exclusive perks when you join my channel. Second, as a GM, you don't have the right to say, they just didn't get it. There's a business management style that says if the employee messes up, the boss should be punished because it's always a training issue. I've been the GM of a campaign before where I got frustrated with my players. My frustration came from what I viewed as my players passively absorbing game content. They were not proactive, and if I wasn't repeatedly throwing plot hooks and expository clues at them, they would essentially do nothing during a session. But my frustration turned to disappointment when I realized that I had trained them to be this way. They had all been brand new when we'd started, and so I had been keeping them on a shorter leash during initial sessions with the hope that they would eventually take more and more of the reins. But what I had actually done was train them that if they merely sit back and wait, the story will come to them. It was my fault. There's also a quote I love from Sly Flourish, and he said that half your players don't know what's going on half the time. You can't expect players to remember that single important line of lore you dropped 6 sessions ago. Not everyone takes notes, so you always need to reinforce important exposition and always include more clues than you think you're gonna need. You can't demand your players solve problems in a certain way or expect them to come to certain conclusions. It's your job to make sure the players get it. Next, if you'll excuse Taika's colorful language here, 90% of all ideas are shit. Let this ratio allow you to relax when writing. I especially love the second sentence of this quote because the first part is not exactly comforting on its own. All writers and creators have to face the reality that first drafts are usually not good. But the second sentence of the quote reminds you that it's okay for first drafts to be bad. In fact, I believe most writer's block comes from unconscious notions that we have to be perfect or else it's not worth continuing or even starting. When it comes to tabletop games, I think this rule is incredibly important to remember when building a campaign world. When planning out a world for others to play in, you're going to have a lot of ideas. Most of them will not be good, but that's okay. You still write them down. And then later on, something incredible will happen, like an unexpected convergence. For example, you'll have two mediocre ideas written down. Then you'll figure out a way to blend those two ideas into one, and suddenly, it's now a good idea. But you never would have come to the good idea if you hadn't first spat out the bad ideas. A few years ago, I developed a podcast with a couple other people about writing book descriptions. We had a pitch meeting for the title, and our goal was we would each pitch 20 titles. About 2 minutes into the meeting, one of us pitched the perfect title, and it's what we ended up using, but we still pitched and considered all 60 titles because you never know when a better idea might come along. Fourth on our list is never start with a theme. Instead, collect enough scenes that you think are cool until you find some sort of shape, and find your theme then. Stephen King said that he never thinks about theme when writing his first draft. He just writes a story that amuses him, then he looks for common threads to insert the theme in second draft. And I should clarify here that theme in this context means an underlying story message, not a theme like horror. I only ever wrote one novel where the theme was deliberate. It was my first book, and honestly the theme turned out too heavy-handed. Because unless you're Brennan Lee Mulligan and the villain is secretly capitalism, don't worry about theme. Themes come out naturally during play. They often don't take shape until late in the campaign. Also, if your campaign does not have a deeper theme or message, that's perfectly okay too. There's a good chance some or all of the players at your table will not pick up on the theme anyway, or they might take away completely different thematic lessons than you intended, so just have fun and let the story go where it wants. The next piece of advice is, no matter how unconventional your characters are, always make them more human and more relatable. And for GMs, this is critical advice related to NPCs. I remember the first time I killed off an NPC in a campaign. It was supposed to be shocking and heartbreaking, but the players didn't really care. And they didn't care because I had not done a good enough job of making this NPC relatable and human. Imagine that you have a villain whose goal is to completely ban the color green from all clothing. No one will be allowed to wear green. It seems silly, right? Definitely not worth dying over. Now what if you have a village who regularly wears ceremonial green garb? Now if the BBEG wins, these people will suffer, but it's still not a compelling situation. But now imagine that the party meets a religious leader from the town who explains the significance of the color green. It's deeply tied into these peoples and their identity. Banning green will cause them to lose out on what makes them unique, what binds them together, and what makes them strong. Now you have stakes because it's not about the literal color, rather the color is a metaphor for an entire group losing their identity. Especially if you have an NPC deliver this whole speech in a very impassioned way, emotional connections create stakes. It works every time. Next on our list is failure is a brilliant thing, and I'll tell you what, this is one of the hardest life lessons I've had to learn. I've had to repeat it many times, but I learned much more from failure than success. When a session goes great and everyone has a wonderful time, there's little educational benefit to it. When the session is a wreck, oh, what an opportunity for growth. Have you ever seen a mechanic submerge a tire in water to locate a leak? That's what you can do after a bad session to find the leaks. Find them and fix them, because a bad time is only a bad time if you don't learn anything from it. Number 7 is make sure to do the opposite of what you've seen before. Now we could have a whole argument about subverting expectations and reversing tropes and whether or not that's actually a good storytelling technique. But for role-playing games, the twist is one of the most useful tools in your toolbox. As a GM, all you have to do is occasionally ask yourself, what if the opposite were to happen? And always keep that as an option in your back pocket. Here's an example. Let's say the last session ended with a trusted NPC about to lead the party up a dangerous mountain pass to a secluded cave entrance. So a very easy thought exercise for you to pursue when you're walking the dog between sessions is just consider the opposite of each beat in the plan. What if the NPC doesn't lead them up, perhaps because the NPC betrays the party? What if the dangerous mountain pass is curiously not dangerous at all when they attempt it? What if there is no secluded cave entrance on the path? What if the cave entrance isn't secluded at all and there are actually obvious signposts along the trail leading to the cave entrance? Now, you don't have to actually do all or any of these opposites, but it's useful to consider them. Because much of the time when I do this, I uncover plot holes or logic gaps in my existing plan and world. This pits your campaign ideas against a logic wall, and they will come out stronger for it. Don't be scared of the logic wall. And I believe that's it for writing advice from Taika Waititi. I hope you found something useful in there to take, and if not, well, I probably won't ever see you again. Anyway, this is GM Jim. Now go out there and have fun cooking up stories for your friends.